The skeletal system is a major physical support and protection organ system. It is going to support all the other softer tissues of the body and protect our vulnerable internal organs. Looking at the skeletal system, we see robust elements where we have very important vital organs, like the skull protecting the brain, the rib cage protecting the lungs and heart. The skeletal system also functions in movement because it is attached to the muscular system via tendons. It can even be thought of as part of the larger musculoskeletal system. So, by providing an attachment point to muscle, the whole body can be moved. The skeletal system functions in storage as the extracellular matrix of bone has a large amount of calcium in it. This calcium can be deposited or withdrawn, just like money from a bank, according to the needs of the body. So, it's a storage site for calcium ions. Because marrow is housed here, it can also be a storage site for adipose tissue or fat. We have two types of marrow, and one, yellow bone marrow, is composed entirely of adipose tissue. Finally, the skeletal system functions in blood cell production, or hematopoiesis, as red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets are produced in the red bone marrow. The components of the skeletal system include, bone, that's the primary component, but also cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the most abundant type, but remember we have two others, fibrocartilage and elastic cartilage. All these cartilages provide a tough, smooth, friction-free surface and also provide a resilient shock absorption function. So friction is going to be reduced where bones meet each other. Flexible support will be provided that absorbs shock, and cartilage also forms a model for bone formation as our bones are formed in utero. Tendons and ligaments are both attachment structures, and their structure is the same. However, tendons attach bone to muscles, and ligaments attach bones to bones. You may have noticed that these are all connective tissues: bone, cartilage, tendons, ligaments, these last two being dense, regular, collagenous connective tissue. And all connective tissue tends to have a large amount of extracellular matrix. And it's that extracellular matrix that's going to give these different components their function and structure. Now, thinking back to the components of the extracellular matrix, we have various protein fibers that might be present. We have varying amounts of fluid and minerals. We have non-fibrous proteins. One element we didn't discuss much is the proteoglycan. These are proteins that are attached to sugars or polysaccharides, like a pine branch is attached to pine needles. So the protein would be the branch, and the needles are the polysaccharides. You can see a diagram here. Due to the structure of the proteoglycans, they attract and then hang on to water. So they store water for connective tissues Proteoglycans are abundant in cartilage and also found in bone, and they can give these elements a smooth quality that reduces friction and the ability to withstand compression and shock. Looking at the components of the extracellular matrices of these various components, bone has an extracellular matrix that has both organic and inorganic components. The organic components are mostly collagen fibers, which give bone the flexibility that it has. Minerals are calcium and phosphate coming together to form a crystal called hydroxyapatite, which gives bone its strength and ability to bear weight in compression. Because it's mineralized, it's not very flexible, but this organic collagen component does give it a little bit of give. The extracellular matrix of cartilage is non-fibrous collagen and these proteoglycans. So cartilage is quite smooth. It reduces friction where it's found at the ends or surfaces of bones. Here it's also able to absorb shock. Tendons and ligaments are composed of dense, regular, collagenous connective tissue. The extracellular matrix is packed densely with collagen fibers that are all running in the same direction. So these structures are very flexible, but also very tough and resistant to tearing, pulling, shearing forces. So they act as bungee cords to strap muscles to bone and bones to each other, so they can still move, but they are firmly attached to each other. Looking at bone organs, we can classify them according to shape. This is something that might be more applicable to lab, but it appears here in lecture 2, so we'll talk about it. Shape classification is straightforward. Long bones are longer than they are wide, like the bones of the limbs. Short bones are shorter. They're about as broad as they are long, so kind of cube-shaped. These are the bones of the carpals and tarsals, or the wrists and ankles. Flat bones, you guessed it, they're flat, and they're very thin, flat bones like the ribs, the scapula of the shoulder, and our skull or cranial bones. Irregular bones are those that don't fit into the above categories, so none of the above. These bones may be symmetrical or not. They often have various processes or projections that poke out, and foramen or holes and indentations. The vertebral bones and bones of the face are good examples. Looking here, we can see some examples. Long bones like the femur, tibia, fibula of the leg, or humerus, radius, and ulna. Short bones like the carpals or tarsals. Flat bones include those of the skull, and ribs, sternum, scapula. And then irregular bones like the vertebral bones, and this is the sphenoid bone of the skull. Facial bones like the maxilla would be good examples too. There is one last type of bone called a sesamoid bone. That's sesamoid. Sesamoid, kind of like a sesame seed, I guess. Sesamoid bones are those that are encased in soft tissue. The only naturally occurring one we have is the patella or kneecap bone. We can form sesamoid bones as calcium deposits in softer tissue, but these wouldn't be shared amongst individuals. Now we focus in on the long bone because this is a bone we'll use to illustrate bone formation. And to talk about it effectively, we need to know what the different parts of it are. This is your femur, a typical long bone, and it's divided into two major regions. We have one diaphysis, which is the cylindrical central shaft or body of the long bone, right here. So if you were to grab a bone, it's probably the diaphysis you would grab. Compact bone tissue, which is very hard and resilient, is plentiful here on the outside, giving the diaphysis strength. On each end, we have an epiphysis. So epiphysis here, there would be a distal epiphysis on the other end. Think E for epiphysis, E for end. They make the knobby ends of the bone. There is hard compact bone on the outside here, and then soft spongy bone, which has spaces in it, makes up the inside. So plentiful spongy bone on the inside of these epiphyses. Lining the epiphyses, wherever the bone comes into contact with another bone and forms a joint, we have a thin layer of hyaline cartilage called articular cartilage. Because cartilage is so smooth and absorbs shock, this makes a great addition to the joints to reduce friction when the bones move against each other and absorb shock as the body moves. We may see an epiphyseal plate between the epiphysis and diaphysis. This is a plate of hyaline cartilage that allows the bone to grow in length and make an individual taller. You've noticed we don't keep growing taller indefinitely. So this epiphyseal plate seals up and forms an epiphyseal line sometimes in our late teens or early 20s as that cartilage is replaced by bone tissue. Within the diaphysis, we'll see the medullary cavity. Medulla or medullary pops up from time to time in anatomical and biological terminology. It indicates the middle. It almost sounds and looks like middle. So this is the cavity or space in the middle of the bone, specifically the diaphysis. While it looks empty here, in a living bone, it's filled with soft marrow tissue, fetal bones, and when we're infants, we'll see more red bone marrow, which gives rise to blood cells. And as we age, that red marrow is replaced by yellow bone marrow, which is adipose tissue. So that would fill this whole space or cavity. Lining the external surface of the bone everywhere where there's no articular cartilage is the periosteum. Peri means around, so you can think of this as the outer shrink wrap or wrapping of the bone. It's a thin connective tissue membrane with bone cells that is divided into two layers. Outer layer has lots of blood vessels which service the bone, and it's plentiful with nerves. When we, say, hit our shin or break a bone, It's the nerves here in the periosteum that allow us to feel all that pain. The periosteum is continuous with the collagen fibers of the tendons and ligaments that attach to the bone. Underneath that fibrous layer, there's a thin layer of bone cells that are going to work to allow the bone to grow and heal and repair. Lining the medullary cavity is an even thinner endosteum. Endo means within or inside. So this is our inner layer. This is not open to the outside, so it is thinner and doesn't have any type of protective element to it. It's only a single cell layer thick with collagen fibers knitting those cells together. The bone cells found here can work to repair, remodel, and grow the bone on the inside. When we break out our microscopes and look more closely at our bones, we see that there are two types of bone tissue: compact bone and spongy bone. Compact bone tissue is named for its arrangement, the appearance of its extracellular matrix. It looks like it's been compacted or gone through a trash compactor. There's very little empty space, mostly solid matrix. This is located on the external portion of bones. So the outer part of the diaphysis of long bones, where it makes a very thick supportive layer, and the thinner surfaces of other bones, where it protects the internal portion of the bone. The structural unit of compact bone is the osteon. The osteon is a circular structure or arrangement of extracellular matrix that repeats to form compact bone tissue. So you can see here, looks like the diaphysis to me, right? We've got our outer fibrous layer of the periosteum, that thinner inner layer where bone is produced and manipulated. And then when we get to the bone, this would be the outer compact bone portion. You see all these repeating circles, and this is our osteon. The osteon is composed of multiple circular plates or rings of bone matrix called lamellae, or more specifically, concentric lamellae. If we're being technical, there are also circumferential lamellae that go all the way around the diaphysis, and interstitial lamellae in between osteons. But inside this osteon is going to be these concentric or circular lamellae. So, in other words, right, we have our circular osteon. Ran out of room there, but you get my drift. And then making up that osteon, we have these multiple rings of solid matrix. And each one of these would be lamellae. Maybe you can think laminated, perhaps. These are just multiple laminated layers that build this bone tissue. We can see then, we look closely, well, actually, let's first deal with the central canal. And I'll recreate that beautiful drawing here. Our osteon. These are just a little small. It's easy to get bogged down in the details of the drawing. So we have osteon with the multiple lamellae. And then you may have noticed in the middle, we have kind of a bullseye situation. This is where the blood vessels, lymphatic vessels that service each osteon are located, appropriately named the central canal. You can see it here. See here. It's cut in half so you can really see the blood vessels there. So central canal is smack dab there in the center, and then the lamellae radiate out. Because we have solid mineralized matrix here, the bone cells, or osteocytes, bone cells literally, have to live in spaces, little spaces or houses, called lacunae. This word lacunae means lake, so you could think of it as a lake dug out of this hard mineralized matrix. These lacunae are found sandwiched between lamellae. So like this. And within each lacunae, you're going to see the osteocyte, which fills up the lacunae. Now, we know that when cells are cut off from blood supply, like say the cells of the epidermis, they die. They have no way of getting the oxygen and nutrients they need to sustain life. These osteocytes would die too if they were cut off from blood. To connect them to the main blood supply in the central canal, there are many tiny radiating cracks or canals that come off of each lacunae. These allow the bone cells or osteocytes to be connected to the blood supply in the central canal, and they also allow neighboring osteocytes to be connected to each other. There are tiny processes of bone cells that fill up each of these cracks and reach out towards their neighbors, where the processes touch each other, have gap junctions so they can communicate with each other and coordinate their activities. So even though each one is housed in its own individual lacunae, they still talk to each other. They're not total hermits. These cracks are called canaliculi, which literally means tiny canal, but it's a hard word to remember. Way back when I first started teaching, a student had a great hint. She said, and it works a little better in lab when you can see the model, but she said, these look like eyes, the osteocytes in the lacunae. So that makes these canaliculi kind of look like eyelashes. And when you say canaliculi, it kind of sounds like, can I lick your eye? And that's how she remembered it. And I think that's a pretty good way. This is an image of real bone tissue, and now we can see the osteons here too. They might not be perfect circles, but they are circular with these circular lamellae, many lamellae making them up. We've got the central canal in the middle with the blood vessels, like a bullseye. And then these darker spots are the lacunae with the osteocytes inside them. All these little cracks are the canaliculi. And there's lots of them. You can see that there's many, which does give a cracked appearance to bone tissue. So remember, compact bone, solid matrix, very strong. It's going to be found on the outside of all our bones, plentiful in the diaphysis, where it protects and supports. Versus our spongy bone, which is also called cancellous bone, though I have not heard that one very much. It's an older term. Spongy bone is located on the inside of bones, within the epiphyses and in the center of other bones. Spongy bone does not have osteons. Instead, the building block are the trabeculae, which are interconnecting rods and beams of bone tissue that add strength to bones. Spaces between trabeculae contain either red or yellow bone marrow. So there are no osteons, but there are lamellae, and then between the lamellae you will see lacunae housing osteocytes. Osteocytes are still connected via the canaliculi. So the other elements are present here, just no osteons. And maybe, if you're a more visual person, you can think, okay, well, O for osteon. I won't write it all out, I promise. Right? Because osteon begins with O, and then the osteon itself looks like an O. Versus trabeculae with the beams and then the perpendicular or rather parallel rods. Kind of looks like a T. A T for trabeculae. So that might be a way to remember what these two